What's up, hobby friends, and welcome to another video of roster building for Marvel Crisis Protocol. In this video, I'm going to be talking about my second favorite affiliation, which is the Convocation. And then before I dive in, as always, just caveating that because this game is constantly evolving and changing, Atomic Mass is releasing new heroes constantly, which does change the power dynamic of the game. This video is less about definitive do's and don'ts of characters and cards to take or don't take, and more the theoretical approach of why I'm picking the cards I'm picking, sort of what they offer in terms of the strengths they bring or shoring up the affiliation's weaknesses. And then in the future, as the game continues to change, you can change along with it. You can take this understanding and apply it to future choices and decisions. So briefly talking about the strengths and weaknesses of the Convocation. In terms of strengths, they have a really versatile and flexible playstyle. Their ability to place their leadership on anybody means that you can really tailor your list based on the specific matchup, not just in terms of crises, but who you're facing. It also gives you incredible flexibility in terms of building your 10-man roster. You're not limited to taking one or two key pieces because they're your leader and then they pair along well with the leader. But you can pick whichever affiliated models you want just based on playstyle, maybe aesthetics, and then you know that you can pick whichever one to be your leader. They also have a diverse range of toolkits with their in-affiliation heroes, ranging from support pieces to control pieces to heavy hitters, and they have a lot of strong affiliated tactics cards. Unfortunately, this is also, I think, one of the big weaknesses of theirs. They have to give up one of their 10 tactics cards for their leadership ability. And then because they have a lot of strong in-affiliation cards to choose from, it can be very difficult to narrow down the specific 9 tactics cards you have left in list building, and then picking your 5 in-game. Apart from Doctor Strange, both the original and Supreme, as well as Dr. Voodoo when he has his Brother Daniel token, the team doesn't have any real durability. Their physical defense and then their energy defense as well tends to be on the low side, which means that their heavy hitters tend to be very glass cannony and they can't take a hit in return. And then your low physical defense makes that your team very vulnerable to throws. In addition, a lot of the heroes tend to be high threat cost, which does mean that you're bringing potentially fewer activations, and every daze or KO that you suffer hurts your ability to play the game, and it also punishes your misplays, largely because your activations, when playing against a wider team, are more valuable. If you're only bringing 4 characters, so that's 8 activations total, and your opponent's bringing 5, so they have 10, that means that every turn they have 2 more actions to do score points, land attacks, gain power, reposition models, and over the course of a 6-turn game, that gives them potentially 12 more actions to do things. So having fewer activations does mean that you need to think very carefully about what you're doing, and every wasted action hurts a lot more for you than your opponent. So some of the tips that I've sort of learned as I've been playing the affiliation: Convocation is one of the harder affiliations to play. It does require good knowledge of your character cards and synergies, and knowing when to play the right tactics cards can make or break a turn or a game for you. So you really want to make sure that you're getting your reps in, play a lot of your games. Don't be afraid to try things out, whether with your affiliated heroes and different combinations or with the characters you splash in, largely because I think there is a steep learning curve with the team. And the only way to overcome it and be good with Convocation is to play games. Know your team, know your matchups, know what opponents can do. And in turn, the more you play, the stronger you will get. Don't be afraid to get stuck in. The low physical and potentially energy defense of your team and your inherent fragility can make you want to play defensive and very cagey. However, having cards like the Ironbound books of Shumagorath can make you surprisingly durable versus physical attacks. And of course, when a character KOs, it gives you power, and it can return that card back to your hand, buying you another turn of durability. Your team also needs power to function, and the only way you're going to generate power is by landing hits and potentially taking them. And then you shouldn't be afraid to trade health points or dazes as long as it puts you ahead on victory points. More than any other affiliation I've played or played against, I've found that Convocation tends to trade the most because of their fragility. And you start to see their characters and their health points as resources you trade. Or at least for me, when I'm playing a team like Web Warriors, I tend to focus a lot on force preservation because I need my pieces to play the game. Whereas with Convocation, I tend to find that I'm more willing to trade my heroes as long as I'm trading up. If I can continue to generate a healthy victory point lead turn over turn, I'm okay with only having 1 or 2 activations at the end of the game if it means that my opponent can't score those victory points and trade back to even out the score or win the game. So when it comes to actually building your rosters, there are 3 components. You're going to have to pick your crises, so your 3 extracts and your 3 secures. You're going to have to pick your 10-man roster of heroes, and then your list of 10 tactics cards. As always, I want to go in that order. I want to pick my crisis cards first, then my 10-man roster, and then my tactics cards. So the crisis cards are essentially the task or the goal that I'm trying to accomplish. And until I know what my mission objectives are, I don't know what tools I need to bring in order to complete that objective or the objectives. If you think about your task as, for example, hammering a nail, you're going to want to make sure that you bring the right tool. You want to bring a hammer and not a screwdriver. You wouldn't show up to a construction site with a screwdriver as your tool and then find out that your task is to hammer nails. You haven't brought the right tools to the job because you didn't know what the job was or you didn't account for what the job could be. So you want to make sure that you have your crisis cards picked first. Those are your tasks. And then from there, you build your roster to accomplish those tasks. And then you make sure that your roster and then the tactics cards you have flexibility so that if the task changes based on the matchup and what your opponent brings, you're ready to tackle that sort of challenge and break down that puzzle. When it comes to picking specific crisis cards, I find that Convocation want to play a more centralized game because a lot of their pieces need to be within a range 2 or 3 to support each other. You want to pick crises that have a low objective count, that concentrate the action at certain key points on the board. So when it comes to looking at deployment types, I tend to prefer objectives or crises with deployment types C, D, and E. C and E focus the action along a line of scrimmage, either horizontally in the middle of the board or vertically dividing the board in half. And then the deployment type D has an objective on both sides of the board as well as 2 centralized in the middle. So what it means is that you can have a character sort of holding the middle or middle back in your area and still be in range to cover the 2 objectives in the middle of the board on either of the wings. If you're looking at specific crises for secures, the number is a little lower. I tend to only prefer 3 of them. So Gamma Wave sweeps across the Midwest, Intrusions open across the city as seals collapse, and Terrigen Clouds. So 2 of these objectives have a deployment type C, and then the 3rd Gamma Wave has a deployment type of E. So we're looking at those lines of scrimmage where the action is going to be focused around 1 or 2 key points. If you're looking at Terrigen Clouds, it is a higher scoring game, and because there's only 2 objectives, you can really play a control style game where you focus your really durable character, Doctor Strange, on 1, and you use other characters to either deny scoring, so like Dr. Voodoo, or if you're taking things like Enchantress or Supreme Strange as an alternative, you're repositioning enemy models off of that objective and forcing them to have to waste actions moving back on or trying to take you off. I like Gamma Wave because, again, it forces the action. More than likely, you're going to be holding the center, and the objective in your zone and your opponent's deployment zone is just going to be that 1 VP that both teams score. Unless you're playing a team that is highly mobile and can push and pull a lot. As an example, Web Warriors, I think Gamma Wave is a really strong objective to play for the Convocation. And then similarly, Intrusions, line of scrimmage across the center, and you can basically focus on 1 or 2 key points and denying your opponent the 3rd. When it comes to picking your extracts, I think you have a little bit more flexibility. The 3 that I prefer are Montesi Formula Found, Deadly Legacy Virus Cured, and then Alien Ship Crashes Downtown. So again, you're looking at C and E deployment types. Both, or a couple of these scenarios have a couple of decent alternatives. So alien ship crashes downtown essentially plays the same as Skrulls infiltrate world leadership. The only exception being Skrulls has a slow penalty that I don't think is quite as favorable for you. So I tend to prefer alien ship crashes downtown. And then research station attack is also a fairly decent alternative. Having only one researcher means that you can really force an opponent to come into you. However, if your opponent brings a stronger control team or a team that you find difficult to beat into, it can be difficult for you to wrest control of that researcher. So I tend to not prefer those. A number of these scenarios, or colon scenarios, crises also tend to be high threat value. You're looking at 18s, 19s, and 20s. I find that Convocation to really bring the toys and flexibility in terms of the team you're playing, want to play a high threat game. When you're playing a low threat game like 14, 15, and 16, you're kind of limited in what you can bring. And if you're bringing someone like Original Strange with the Soulstone, a 6th threat, you're kind of forced to take Wong for the activations and the support piece. But if you don't really have room to bring a lot of strong pieces without really hampering your ability to have activations. Bringing a couple 4s and 5s means you're only going to have 3 activations, and you're playing a very punishing playstyle where a single misplay or a single misposition would cost you the game. When it comes to winning the priority roll and determining which, I guess, crises you want to pick, with priority, I would probably choose to pick secures, largely because there are a large number of secures that don't favor Convocation. They tend to be spread out. Whereas with extracts, there are a lot more that you can play into. So unless you know that your opponent has some really strong extracts that you don't want them to have a choice of hammers, as an example, I would almost, with priority, pick secures, because there is a narrower range of crises that my team will be good at. When it comes to actually picking your 10-man roster, once you have your crises picked, you have a lot of flexibility because your leadership ability is not tied down. Your core will largely depend on your playstyle and the characters you choose to splash in. You don't actually have to take Doctor Strange, although I do think that he is a strong piece. I don't think you're going to feel bad if you don't take him, but it does mean that you have to splash in stronger characters to make up for what Doctor Strange does bring. I think that Doctor Strange is probably the tankiest character within the affiliation, and he also brings the most diverse toolkit. The Original Strange is the best supportive piece with his healing and his ability to sort of move around the board and do different things depending on what you need him to do. He has good stat line, good defenses. He hits, but not particularly hard, but he can generate power and do damage, and he can heal and support. And then Sorcerer Supreme Doctor Strange has a similar tank line, stat line for tanking. Less supportive, much more offensive. He's got really strong power generation, and his Scalpel of Doctor Strange can move not just your models, but enemy models off of objectives, and he hits like a truck. So depending on what you need your character to do, I think both of them are really strong choices to fit in your roster. I would also always take Wong and Magic. I think Wong, especially paired with the original Doctor Strange, is a 2 threat, which helps to fill in those odd point values and still buy you 2 actions and then activation. He also generates power that you can pass around and heals. So as a supportive piece holding a backfield objective, really, really good. His defenses also increase when he's near the original Doctor Strange. So I think the pair of them together forms a solid 8 threat core that you can build a team around and have a lot of flexibility. And I say 8 threat because you should always take original Doctor Strange with the Soulstone. I find without it, he does have real power generation issues, and he needs power to be able to do what he wants to do. And I feel that without the Soulstone, he's not as great a piece. He's not going to be doing what he wants to do consistently every turn. In combination with those two, I would also always take Magic. She's one of the few unaffiliated characters that brings a non-mystic attack in her builder. She moves particularly fast, especially with Limbo Step, and her spender, Darkchild, isn't particularly expensive and also hands out conditions like Bleed and Incinerate. I think she's an amazing piece. She's also pretty good defensively with a 3-3-4 stat line. So she's more tanky than your average Convocation member, and at 3 threat, you're able to bring a solid 3-man core, and you can start splashing in some 4 or 5 heavy hitters to run 5 wide, whether inaffiliated or unaffiliated, and still be Convocation. I've been playing her a lot recently, and I love what she brings to the table. Baron Mordo and Dr. Voodoo also make strong pieces to bring. Although they can be somewhat situational based on what other characters you're bringing along and or the specific threat value that you're playing. So talking about Dr. Voodoo first, what he brings to the table is objective control and a somewhat tanky stat line, but only when he's holding the Brother Daniel token. Being able to add +2 to his defenses means that he's great at holding the wings unsupported, and he can probably fight a good 1v1 or a 2v1 in a pinch against most characters that aren't absolute death dealers like Corvus Glaive. And you can reasonably expect him to buy you time to hold a token or try to deny a flank. However, once you assign that Brother Daniel token to an enemy model, he becomes incredibly squishy and goes down incredibly fast. Being able to force an enemy model to drop a token and no longer hold an objective, especially if they're the only model on a flank, can win you the game. However, because he is a 4 threat and because doing so makes Dr. Voodoo incredibly squishy, he doesn't really hit hard and he doesn't offer much else to the team in terms of force multiplication. I feel like he can be a hit or miss choice, and there are times where I've brought him and I've felt bad bringing him. So he's not exactly probably the best choice for a 4 threat. Baron Mordo is the same way. He's got an incredibly diverse toolkit in what he brings. He's a medium move with a big base and flight, so he can really move around the board. He repositions well with his boots. And he's got some great synergies with either a condition game or an attack game. So his Soul Barb ability allows him to splash conditions that you're already applying. So if you're bringing heroes like Clea or Magic, or you're splashing characters like Scarlet Witch, Domino, anybody else who can handle conditions, Mordo pairs very, very well, especially in crises where you are scrumming and you're grouping around 1 or 2 key points on the board. If you're playing a more offensive attack style as well, his Ferocity of Citrak makes a hitter hit really, really hard, or can boost your low dice builders, because Convocation builders tend to be in the 4 or 5 dice range. Being able to add 2 dice for that in exchange for taking a damage can really help you to buy that extra dice to generate a few extra hits, potentially land your triggers, and do more damage. Ancient One, I think, is another must-have in the affiliation. You're not going to bring her in every game, but she is an incredible assassin. Her stat line is nothing to write home about. Only Fizz 2 means that she's incredibly vulnerable to physical attacks and throws. Average energy defense of 3, but incredible mystic defense, so that in a turn that you're playing Ironbound books, or if you're in range with original Doctor Strange to boost her defense line by 2 across the board, in combination with Martial Artist, she is an incredibly tanky character, or can be. And her Astral Strike, when she has the power, can almost one-shot most characters in the game. The problem that she's going to have is she is incredibly power hungry. She requires a lot of support pieces to be around her. And because she's all mystic, doesn't work as well in the mirror match or against characters that have good mystic defense. So she can be hit or miss, but I don't think you'll feel bad including her in your 10-man roster. When you're looking at the mystic affiliation, for glaring weaknesses, you do tend to notice that their physical defense and then their energy defense, with the exception of some heroes, is very low, typically in the 2 range. And then a lot of their attacks are mystic. So when you're splashing characters, you want to find characters that bring improved defenses, higher fizz, higher energy, and then also bring attacks that are physical or energy to diversify your attack portfolio. You don't want to bring all of one type, largely because it makes it easier for your opponent to prioritize heroes that have higher mystic defense, or have characters that are really high in fizz or energy attack, or more importantly, prioritizing throws against a low fizz defense team. So characters I tend to look at for splashing in: Hulk, She-Hulk, Hulkbuster. All of them are fairly durable. I think Hulkbuster requires support from the original Doctor Strange and Wong for healing. He doesn't have as many health points, but he can flip into the smaller Iron Man. And he plays a very good control game, so depending on how you want to play the game with your team, great choice to have. However, I think Hulk is probably my go-to choice for a bruiser. He demands attention from your opponent. He's an incredible heavy hitter, and then he's got great defenses and power generation. I find She-Hulk really only fits into A-Force particularly well. Without her leadership ability for A-Force, she doesn't generate power as heavily, which means that unless she's taking hits, either through direct attacking or by bodyguarding or absorbing damage, she's not going to have the power to consistently do what she wants to do. Some other characters I would also look to splash in are models like Domino, Crystal, or Cable, because of their ability to throw effects and conditions, especially Incinerate. I want to be able to consistently lower my opponent's defenses, especially if it is a low mystic, and just push through builders so that even a 4 or 5 dice builder can do a lot of damage. And then to play the control game, models like Enchantress or Black Cat make great choices. Enchantress has the ability to reposition enemy models, and being Asgard can generate some extra power for herself to do what she wants to do. And then both her and Black Cat have the unique ability to take objectives off of an opponent without the use of tactics cards. You can splash in other models like Miles Morales, who can force opponents to drop an objective, or if you start venturing into the realm of bad guys, Toad also makes a great objective control piece. You have a lot of flexibility in terms of what you splash in. It's largely to fit your playstyle. I would just say look to fill in the gaps in your affiliation. So sharper defenses and diversify your attack portfolio. So when it comes to the 10 tactics cards that you want to bring, I think you're already in a bit of a pinch, largely because there are a few cards that you have to take, or I think are essential to Convocation. The first is your leadership ability. The Bar with No Doors it's a two-sided ability, so you can really pick and choose based on the situation. I do think the Circle of the Cosmos is probably the better choice to have, especially in the beginning. It gives you repositions and extra mobility whenever you take damage. And it does leave you only with 9 cards left. I think you're also going to want to take the Ironbound books of Shumagroth. Because you have such low physical defense, being able to buy a turn where you can swap your Fizz defense for Mystic can actually make you surprisingly durable, because your Mystic defense across the board is so high. You're looking at 4s and 5s typically. So it allows you to get stuck in, it buys you a turn, and then when a character of yours KOs, the card does return to your hand, which buys you repeat value to play the card again. So don't be afraid to play the card early on in the game. Because your Fizz defense is also incredibly low, I think you're vulnerable to a lot of throws. So I think taking Indomitable and Brace for Impact are also essential, which also eats up your 2 restricted card slots. Of the 4 remaining, I think there are a lot of good in-affiliation choices for cards. You can start looking at Book of Cagliostro to buy you extra activations. I think Wand of Watum is really good because of the Elemental Blast. The trigger has 3 condition drops, which pairs very well with Mordo. Alternatively, you can give yourself a bit of a defensive buff by re-rolling 2 defense dice for an entire round, or you can use a superpower twice. When you're looking at characters like Doctor Strange, who can heal, Supreme Strange, who can reposition, Ancient One who can also reposition, Mortal who can splash. You have a lot of really good superpowers that doubling up for a turn could actually give you the advantage to take out a key character, reposition really, really well, and actually swing a victory point in your favor to win the game. A card like Astral Ring, also really good for a character like in the backline who may want to drop a token when they're range 3 for a turn to secure an objective or use their powers and attacks. Ancient One comes to mind because she is so fragile and so close range. Being able to drop us within 3 and then attack from relative safety is a really good ability, but not a must-have. From there, you can look to splash in some unaffiliated cards or character-specific cards, depending on what you're bringing for your roster. Cards that I like to bring tend to focus around objective play. Eyes on the Prize lets you interact within 2, which can surprise your opponent or throw them off guard, largely because you can deploy in a way where a token might be out of range and they might not think that you'd go for it, but then you turn 1 double move and Eyes on the Prize for a 2 range grab. Or if they have a character that dazes and drops a token, you can move and grab it out of range. Mission Objective as well allows you to pass tokens, either from a character holding it, or if a character does get dazed or knocked out, you can pass it along to a character within range rather than be forced to drop it and hand it over to your opponent. Because Convocation do want to play a more supportive grouped up playstyle, you're already going to be in that range 2, range 3 support. So I think Mission Objective plays very well into the way Convocation are already playing on the table. So on screen is a sample Convocation roster. That's what I typically run, and I think it's flexible in terms of tackling a large variety of crises, both secures and extracts, and the combinations that you and your opponent bring, as well as the various matchups that you potentially face when your opponent is bringing. So for my extracts, I'm bringing the Montesi Formula Found, Deadly Legacy Virus Cured, and Alien Ship Crashes Downtown. For my secures, I'm bringing Gamma Wave Sweeps across the Midwest, Intrusions Open across the city as seals collapse, and Terrigen Clouds. And as I mentioned earlier, if I have priority, chances are I'm going to be picking secures, largely because I can play into a lot more extracts. For my roster, I'm bringing both Doctor Stranges, so the original one with the Soul Stone, and then the Sorcerer Supreme. I'm bringing Wong, Ancient One, Magic, Dr. Voodoo, and Baron Mordo. So it's a bulk of the Convocation affiliation. And then for my splash, I'm bringing Hulk as a durable bruiser and tank. Just an offensive piece I can throw into the center and draw attention. And then Domino for a bit of Incinerate and condition play. And then Enchantress for objective control. For my tactics cards, I have the Bar with No Doors, the Ironbound Books of Shimogaroth, the Book of Cagliostro, Astral Ring, the Orb of Agamotto, and the Wand of Watum. I'm also bringing for my restricted cards, Brace for Impact and Indomitable, and then I have Mission Objective and Eyes on the Prize as my last 2 unaffiliated choices. The Orb of Agamotto is a fairly decent card. It allows for reposition within 3, although it is fairly high cost, so you're not always going to play it, and because you're only going to bring 5 cards, it doesn't always make it in. However, I think it's a great tech piece to have in the back pocket. If I'm playing against a team that doesn't have a lot of throws, I may want to slip that in along with some of the other cards instead of bringing Brace for Impact and Indomitable. Unfortunately, the local meta that I do play in, all of the players bring characters that do throw a lot. You're looking at Scarlet Witch, Magneto, Juggernaut, Hulk. So my 3 cards already tend to be the Ironbound Books, Brace for Impact, and Indomitable. And then of the remaining 2 choices I have, I tend to bring Wand of Watum and either Eyes on the Prize or Mission Objective. So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you were able to walk away with some takeaways, whether you're playing the Convocation affiliation or just for roster building in general for Marvel Crisis Protocol. Some of the broader strategies and methodologies you can take away and apply to your own affiliation and roster building. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you give it a like and follow for more awesome weekly content. And I'll make sure to drop links to my other social media platforms if you want to follow those as well. As always, until next time, happy hobbying.